Hello there, people of the internet. So today we're going to be running a little bit of an experiment. A fellow gun tuber by the name of 8mm Mauser man. I brought him up on my channel a couple of times because we like talking to one another and coming up with different collaborations and reasons to shout each other out. Well, he sent me in some ammunition, specifically 308 ammunition of different types, different kinds, and he also sent me a conundrum. It seems that the ammunition that he had sent me, in particular from a 7.62 NATO rifle, was having a pretty big issue with bulged primers. So he wanted to go ahead and send me a couple of rounds so I could go ahead and put a couple of rounds through my rifles and see if the primers are bulged in my rifles. Now I have both 7.62 NATO rifles and 308 rifles. We're going to go ahead, run a little experiment, see what the results are when fired from these rifles. Now before we go ahead and run that experiment, I'm going to go ahead and come up with some hypothesis ideas based off of my previous experiences. Today we're going to be running both my, what I call, Toolless Special rifle. This is a TOZ 122. I call it the Toolless Special because that's a lot easier to pronounce. This is a 308 chambered rifle, and we will be comparing it to my Ishapur 308. This right here is a 7.62 NATO rifle. Plenty of people have run 308 ammunition through these rifles simply because, although they are chambered technically for 7.62 NATO ammunition, the actions are plenty strong enough to be able to handle 308. Issue is those primers. 8mm Mauser man had run this ammunition that we're going to run through his Ishapur 308 and noticed bulged primers. He did not notice bulged primers from 7.62 NATO ammunition ran through a 7.62 NATO rifle. Honestly, just from my own personal experience, I have ran plenty of the ammunition that he ran through his 7.62 NATO rifle through 308 rifles. For example, not this Toolless Special, but like I've had several Savage Axis 308s that I've ran steel case through, you know, for plinking purposes. Never had an issue with bulged primers. A couple of assumptions that he made, specifically one of them was that perhaps the primer is weaker. That's definitely a possibility with this weaker steel case ammunition, but I feel like if that was the case, we would have seen bulged primers in a 308 rifle as well. I had not seen that in my Savage. Maybe I'll see that in this here Toolless Special, maybe not. But whenever he saw bulged primers, it was from 308 ammunition in a 7.62 NATO rifle. So it will be interesting to see if this particular ammunition has no bulged primers in a 308 rifle. Another thing that he brought up was that perhaps, since steel case does not quite expand as much as brass does, maybe the brass or the softer material that the primer is made out of expanded instead. I feel like if that was the case, I would see expansion in the 308 chambered rifles as well. Nope. I am willing to bet that the bulged primers are based basically entirely off of headspace. I have fired 308 ammunition, particularly the steel case ammunition, in my Oviedo Mausers on several occasions, and I've actually noticed these bulged primers, although I didn't care, and eventually one of the primers blew out the back of the bolt and into my eye, which was not a very fun experience. But my Oviedo Mausers are technically chambered for 7.62 CETME, but are dimensionally the same as the 7.62 NATO ammunition. So if I were a betting man, I'd say it's probably based off of the headspace of the rifle. The 7.62 NATO ammunition is just slightly loose in that chamber, just ever so slightly. Loose enough for that primer to have somewhere to go whenever that massive pressure from the explosion takes place. And the support behind that is that I have not noticed any bulged primers, at least not nearly to the extent that he had. As a matter of fact, I'll throw up some pictures of the bulging that he was having with his primers. I've not noticed anything even remotely close to that in a 308 rifle firing 308 ammo. Only firing 308 ammunition through a 7.62 NATO rifle. That's the only time I've noticed that, unless the rifle has been damaged and headspace is off anyway, in which case it still is a headspace problem. Alright, now, before we get started, let's start off with the control here. I have a couple of rounds of 7.62 NATO brass case ammunition. This stuff right here, I've ran through both of these rifles on numerous occasions, just, you know, running the rifles. I bought this stuff by the surplus and I run the rifles with it. And as you can see, our primers are absolutely normal. This right here is the way a primer should look whenever it was fired. So 7.62 NATO ammunition can be safely fired from a 308, and it can be safely fired from the 7.62 NATO rifle, obviously. But the question is, I have 3 different kinds of steel case ammunition, specifically Wolf, Tula, and Silver Bear, each of which had issues with bulged primers in a 7.62 NATO rifle. So we're going to go ahead, run 3 rounds of each. I'm only going to do 3 rounds in the 7.62 NATO rifle just because I have had issues with running 308 and 7.62 NATO rifles, such as my Oviedo Mauser. And the last thing I want is to break my rifle here. So 3 rounds should be good enough to see if we have any bulging primer issues. Now, our Tula and our Wolf are both 150 grain full metal jackets, and our Silver Bear is actually a 145 grain full metal jacket. Our Tula and our Wolf are just the cheap looking steel case ammunitions, and the Silver Bear is also, you know, just cheap steel case, but it is a far nicer looking case, far more polished. Okay, without further ado, we're going to step out to a little bit of a distance. I'm going to set up camera B just because people like camera B, and we'll go ahead, load up a couple of rounds, and fire those off. Okay, we're going to go ahead and do 1 rifle at a time here, compare the results afterwards. This is the Wolf ammunition, 140, 150 grain full metal jackets, fired out of my Tula Special. Let's launch some lead. Now, I don't even know if this scope is still on target here. There it is. Thank you, Kevin. Oh, I guess I gotta go find that case. Of course I have it, hold on. Alright, firing us a second round, and this time I'll make sure to not launch the case into the atmosphere. Give me that. Thank you very much. I will set those right there. Perfect. Alright, this is our 3rd round of Wolf ammo. Alright, just for the sake of speed, I'm just going to single load this thing. This right here is now the Tula ammunition, fired from the 308 rifle. Whew! That Tula ammo has some force behind it. It feels like it has way more force than, way more concussive blast than our Wolf ammo did. But she is hitting on target, and the concussive blast increase is consistent. 1 more round of our Tula ammo here. Let's launch it downrange. Okay. Up next, oops, don't lose that now. Already lost 1. Up next is our Silver Bear. We're going to go ahead and fire 3 rounds of the Silver Bear ammunition, and then we will run the Ishapur 7.62 rifle, and then we will compare results. Kevin's just over there staring at me. Kevin, you're getting way too comfortable with gunfire, you know that? Alright, a lot less recoil with Silver Bear. Don't lose that now. I gotta remember not to just send the casings. I am absolutely astonished that that steel plate is still standing after these rounds. Alright, next round. This is our last round for this rifle. Silver Bear had like the least amount of recoil from all these rounds. Okay, up next we're going to move on to the Ishapur rifle. Okay, this right here is the Wolf ammunition fired from the Ishapur 7.62 rifle. Now, I have never fired 308 ammunition through this rifle, only the 7.62 NATO stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and hold this away from me and just fire into the dirt to see the results. The results are, that was pretty cool. Alright, definitely have some stuck case right there. Okay, but I don't see any fracturing or anything like that. Alright, I got those there. I will set these right there. Alright, I guess I'm safe to fire. I missed. These are definitely harder to extract than the brass case ammunition. I'm all nervous with this stuff because I don't want something to blast back into my face. Alright, Wolf ammunition has been fired. Now we're moving on to toll ammo. This stuff has detonated on me before, so I am quite nervous about it. Okay, let's go ahead and just send it downrange like we mean it. Also hard to extract, just like the Wolf ammo. Minor feeding problems with this rifle. I'll have to check out 8mm Mauser man's video on what to do if you're having issues with one of these rifles feeding. Alright. Well, so far, my face is still intact, so that's a really good sign. Alright, last round for the toll ammo. Please don't detonate on me. Pretty sure that one was a little low. Alright, up next we have 3 rounds of Silver Bear for our Ishapore rifle here. This stuff's normally pretty good. I don't feel all that bad about shooting this stuff through this rifle. Alright, hopefully this rifle does not detonate in my face. Now that I've said that, I pray that I didn't jinx myself. Knock on wood. That one there looks like it went a little bit right. I will eventually figure this magazine out. That one was a little bit left. Whew. Running this much ammo this quickly is kind of difficult. I don't know where that one went, but it sounded kind of funny. Anytime you have ammunition that sounds kind of funny, just check your rifle. Make sure you don't have any squib loads in there. Nope, I am officially good. Okay, well now that our shooting is done, let's go ahead and compare the rounds. This right here is the Tula ammunition, or Tula ammunition, however it is that you feel like pronouncing that. This right here is what we fired out of the Tula Special rifle, and this right here is what we fired out of the Ishapore 7.62 NATO rifle. The Tula Special rifle, the primers look absolutely fantastic. There's no bulging or rippling of any sort on these bad boys. Center strikes on all of them. Man, that is good to know. Now I know I can buy steel ammunition for that rifle. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate that, buddy. Kevin agrees. He really likes that rifle. Now, the Tula ammunition through my Ishapore rifle is actually far better than I was expecting. The primers are just a hair bulged, like just ever so slightly more than the 308 rifle, but it is not anything that I would worry about at all. So I don't really want to push the 7.62 NATO rifle by running more ammunition or more 308 ammunition through it, but honestly, this is just my 2 cents. I have noticed that people who run 308 ammunition through a 7.62 NATO rifle, it works for a while, but eventually, especially as you fire those hotter loads, you will eventually start to see worse and worse wear. I believe that's because the headspace is just slowly being thrown off, and this is not really the case with very strong rifles, but this seems to be the case with rifles that are especially used like converted rifles. Like a lot of your old Mausers will do this. I've seen a couple of not necessarily made to spec Enfield rifles like this, but I've seen some Enfield conversions from 308 that do exactly that. I've seen some Mosin Nagants or Nagant conversions that do exactly that. They work for a while with the 308, but over time they just get to the point to where you start seeing more and more issues with this 308 ammunition. So I'm probably not going to fire a whole lot of steel ammunition through this thing, but it is good to know that if I need to, I can. So we do have just a hair more of a bulge on the tool ammunition in the 7.62 NATO rifle than we do in the 308 rifle. Okay, now we're going to be looking at the Wolf ammunition. The Wolf ammunition is surprising. The tool ammunition seemed to have been the hotter stuff, just judging by the concussive blast of the thing, but the Wolf ammunition is where we see the most dramatic results. In my 308 rifle, we see a little bit of primer bulge, not too significant, but definitely there. It exists. It's not something I'd worry about in my 308 rifle. They're not popping up out of the seams like they were an 8mm Mauser man's rifle, but they are definitely just a hair bulged. However, in my 7.62 NATO rifle, they are considerably more bulged than they were in the 308 rifle. They're not popping out of the seams, not nearly as bad as 8mm Mauser's rifle was, but these right here are definitely bulged out way more than the tool ammo and way more than the Wolf through the 308. So that's an interesting little comparison tidbit right there. I'm not quite sure how well it shows up on camera, but trust me, it's noticeably different to the point to where I can see it with my eyes. But again, although it is bulged, I still would not worry about this too terribly much. It is very interesting to note. I was expecting to see bulged primers, like significantly bulged, like 8mm Mauser's rifle was doing, and like my Oviedo Mausers had done. I've ran this steel case ammunition through my Oviedo Mausers on many occasions, and I've dealt with bulged primers and on my ammunition that I was running with that rifle. That's why I'd come to the conclusion that headspace, because I did not see any of this bulging in a 308 rifle. Okay, now I know that I had seen or said that the Wolf ammunition had very dramatic results, but the Silver Bear is actually quite dramatic. Silver Bear through the 308, absolutely perfect. No bulging, no primer deformation of any sort. I feel like this right here is exactly what you want your primers to look like. However, fired out of the 7.62 NATO rifle, each one of them is bulged out. They're not rippled at the seams, not coming out of the primer pocket, but each one of them is in fact bulged out. So, after seeing the results here, what is my conclusions? Okay, well, we're just gonna pause right there for just a second. Hello there, people of the internet. This is me a couple days later. There's one little tidbit of information that I did not take into account whenever I came up with the conclusion that I am still going to put into this video, just because I think it still has a lot of valuable information in it and a lot of insight towards the outcome that I've come up with. Now, whenever we go back to the original video, which will be played after this little snidbit right here, keep in mind that that little piece of conclusion was taken into account before this little snidbit of information was considered. So 8mm Mauser man had said one thing that I completely dismissed. Well, not really dismissed. I more like was not paying attention to it, or like it went in one ear and out the other. It's just one of those things that I like glossed over and didn't really register until I had gone back and watched the video again. Well, 8mm Mauser man had said that he had taken brass case 308 ammunition, fired it through his Ishapore, and it did not have any signs of bulged primers. Now, if that is the case, then that takes my original assumptions, my original conclusions about what we have seen, and it completely makes them obsolete. It makes them not necessarily untrue, because there is still a lot of merit to what I have to say, but a lot of the conclusions that I've come up with are less plausible because of this particular case. So what I'm going to do, I went out to actually a couple different places to try and find a box of brass case 308 ammunition. It was an adventure. I found some Aguila. I apologize if I mispronounced that. 308 Winchester. This is brass case ammunition. This right here is 150 grain. I paid like 35 bucks for this box of ammunition right here, just to see for this video if we have bulged primers with it. So we're using the same rifle that we were using to test the steel case ammunition. Ow! Ah, that hurt. But I want to see if the brass case 308s will have bulged primers. If we do not have any bulged primers with the brass case 308 ammunition, then I have one legitimate conclusion that I believe is applicable, but I also believe that this deserves more research. So I am actually going to make a part 2 to this video after I've made some calls and talked to some people that are a little bit more knowledgeable and professional, not necessarily on the ammunition, but the components of the ammunition and the design of the ammunition. So that will be just like a quick-ish follow-up video, but I think that's going to be really, really cool. So if you want to see that, subscribe to the channel. So this is 3 rounds of our Aguila Full Metal Jacket 308 150 grain. Oh God, don't go anywhere. Stop that. Get in the magazine and stay there. This is going to be exciting. I am curious myself, because I don't think I've ever ran brass 308 ammo through a 7.62 NATO rifle. Now, the steel case 308 ran well. We did have a little bit of bulging, but not anything real significant. So we should have a little bit of bulging with this 308 ammunition if my previous assumptions are correct. According to 8mm Mauser Man, however, that won't be the case. Let's find out. Alright, it is a little overgrown out there, as you can see. We've had a lot of rain in Florida for a little while now, but I can still see my steel silhouette, so that is what we're going for. Okay, alright, first round fired. That's not a good sign. How is it that I'm getting rim lock in an infield that has ammunition that doesn't utilize a rim? There we go. Alright, let's check this case now. That one was a little tougher to extract. Not as easy as the 7.62 NATO ammunition is. Ah, geez. We might be coming to one specific conclusion in this video. Okay, this is our last round of 308 ammunition. And I missed my target. That's fine. In all fairness, that target has been camouflaged anyway. I'm not sure if the extraction is difficult from the ammunition or the bolt, because that bolt does feel rather sticky. I might have to apply some lubricants.
Apply some lubricants.
It's no use, Leo. The hole is just too tight.
Okay, so you know how I said that wasn't good? Well, that's because our brass case 308 ammunition, the primers look absolutely superb. They look just like the primers on my 7.62 NATO ammunition. So that means it has nothing to do whether or not it's 7.62 NATO or 308 ammunition. That is one of the assumptions that I made prior to this testing. So in recollection of the conclusion that I'm going to show after this snidbit, that right there is something that I have just proven false. So keep that in mind. Now there is one other legitimate conclusion that I've come to. I was just rattling this through my mind, you know, thinking, how could this be possible? In my assumption, I think that we're having more of a, not necessarily a headspace issue, but at the same time a headspace issue, just because brass expands much faster and much more effectively than steel. I think that 308 round that does not headspace the same as a 7.62 NATO round, I think that with just the minute levels of play that are in that chamber, with a brass round, that brass would expand with the explosion of the cartridge, and it would expand at a rate that is, of course, different than steel, but it would expand at a rate similar to that of the composition of the primer. I think that the softer material of the primer might be expanding at a faster rate than the steel itself is expanding. So, as that primer expands, the steel itself takes just a smidgen extra time to expand and fill that chamber properly, which is why we see just a little bit of bulging in the primer. Now that is just one assumption. I do have one other assumption, but this is where I need to get into the testing and whatnot. I have to figure out what kind of powder is being used, because if we have a faster burning powder, well, if we have a faster or slower burning powder, then that might make the pressure coefficients different. Now, that is one thing to take into consideration, but what I don't understand is a lot of people will say that this ammunition is hot. You know, it fires at a higher pressure than the brass ammo does, and yet it is a lower velocity. How is that possible? Is that true? Is it false? I'm not sure. This is one of the things that warrants further testing and further research. Now, one of the possibilities is that perhaps the bullet itself on this cheaper ammunition is imperfect. Maybe it is just 1/1000th of an inch too big or too small, creating either more friction or letting gas pass through it. So the pressure would have built to tremendous amounts of pressure greater than the brass ammo would be, or, you know, perhaps as the hot gas passes around the bullet, that pressure would drop before the bullet actually leaves the barrel, and that drop in pressure is what slows the bullet down. That is a possibility, but an unlikely one. Or perhaps the bullet is just a tad bit too large and we have extra friction in that barrel, slowing that bullet down. And that extra friction in the slower bullet would certainly explains why we would have a higher pressure but slower velocity. But I will not know that until I, you know, test the size of the bullet and whatnot, but I cannot do that with the equipment I have, which is why I need to go out and get outside help. Now, these are just a couple of assumptions. My assumption about the expansion of the brass in comparison to the steel, that is the most likely scenario, because that brass would expand at the same rate as the softer primer would, versus the steel, which expands far slower, although it is, you know, still quite instant to you and me. So that primer would be expanding out the back as the steel is still, you know, struggling to expand, and eventually that steel will fill the chamber and the primer will stop expanding because it will have nowhere else to go. That is the most likely scenario, but something as simple as a different powder coefficient, different burning rates, different factors and whatnot, those are also possibilities, but those are inconclusive. It's just one of those things that makes you scratch your head and really wonder why. Now, we don't have the issues that we have with the .308 ammunition in a .308 rifle because it head spaces properly. Even if it is steel case, that primer would have nowhere to go. We see a little tiny smidgen of bulging, but not nearly as significant as the 7.62 rifle. Anyway, that is just my little tidbit of information. I'm still going to show you guys the conclusion that I had come to before this testing with the brass case .308 ammunition was done, just because I think that it still has some merit. So, here it is. I would say that the most likely conclusion I can come up with is if you fire .308 ammunition, which is not the right dimensions and hotter of a load, through a 7.62 NATO rifle, especially if that rifle is made of like a poorer metal or is an older rifle or a conversion, it might work for a while, but over time, it might get to the point to where it no longer works as the headspace is thrown off just enough to cause issues. Now, these Ishapur rifles are not conversions. They were made specifically for 7.62 NATO ammunition, but perhaps over time, of using especially hot 308 ammunition, you might throw off that headspace as the gun just isn't designed to handle that kind of pressure. That's why it works for a little while and then it kind of stops. That's the experiences that I've had with 7.62 NATO rifles running 308 ammunition. I used to think that it was okay because it worked for a while and then it stopped working. Now if you get yourself a military surplus rifle and it's a 7.62 NATO and you try running 308 through it and sometimes it works, and then other rifles you get like bulged primers immediately, keep in mind that these military surplus rifles are basically hand-me-downs. Thank you, Kevin. Basically hand-me-downs, meaning somebody else has had the rifle before you and you don't know how much of what kind of ammunition was ran through that thing. If especially hot ammunition was run through that thing, then maybe it wore out to the point where you're going to start seeing deformations like this. So I could be completely wrong, but like I said, I'm just going off of experience. The Ishapur rifle seems to fire this cheap steel case 308, but this cheap steel case 308 is a lot lower pressure than your like brass case commercially available 308 ammunition. Back whenever I had my Oviedo Mausers and I'd run them consistently, specifically Old Sketchy, I ran probably about 500 rounds of steel case ammo through that thing with no trouble whatsoever until bulged primers started showing up not too terribly long after that. I've heard that the metal work that went into those specific Mausers was not very good, and just over time the metal slowly stretches out or wears out or whatever the hell, and that eventually throws off headspace. That's why I only fire 7.62 NATO ammunition through that versus the steel case stuff. Or brass case 308 stuff. I only fire 7.62 NATO ammunition through those rifles. Now I guess the question as to whether or not it's safe to fire this ammunition through a military surplus rifle is, you know, fire 2 or 3 rounds like I just did, see what the results are, see what the primers look like, see if the cases are cracked any. Just with how stiff this ammunition was, trying to pull it out of the barrel, I'm going to go ahead and probably not run much more of this through my Ishapur rifle, just because I don't want a case to get stuck like it did in my Oviedo Mauser, and then like I had to get a gunsmith to actually drill it out because I tried, you know, pulling it out and the case head came off of it and the actual cartridge itself was still stuck in the chamber, and it was like really stuck. It was definitely a critical malfunction. And I'm also going to point out that quality control on this ammunition is not great. Just because you fired a couple of rounds through your 7.62 NATO rifle and those worked great, fantastic. You might come across one that is maybe, you know, a hotter load just from a factory defect, which happens pretty often, and you go firing that and it messes up your rifle. I mean, keep in mind that you get what you're paid for. The cheaper the ammo, you're going to want a better, stronger gun to be able to handle these hotter loads that are definitely, absolutely going to be in these loads. Okay, well, I'm not entirely sure what else to add to this video. I think I've covered basically all the points that I wanted to cover. We went ahead, we tested the ammunition, we saw the results, pretty dramatic results between the 308 rifle and the 7.62 NATO rifle. Judging by the lack of expected bulging from the primers in the 7.62 NATO rifle, I'd say not a lot of high-end 308 ammunition was fired from it. Or perhaps there's some other factor. I mean, it just takes the slightest bit of head spacing to be off at a pressure that the rifle's not designed for primers to start bulging out like that. So, I mean, we're talking 1,000th or a little bit more than that of an inch. Like, not much at all. Okay, well, this is my 2 cents on the matter. 8mm Mauser man wanted me to run this through a couple of my rifles. I don't think he actually has a 308 rifle, which is one of the reasons he sent me this ammunition to run through my rifle. But I wanted to run it through the same rifle that he did to see if we got the same results, and we did not. Our rifles seem to be just a little bit different, but we're literally running the same ammunition. I got this ammo from the same exact box that he had run his ammunition from. Like, literally the same ammo, and the results were different. So that definitely tells me headspace issues, because if it was an issue with the cartridge like he had brought up, then we would definitely see the same results with the rifle. Okay, well, this was a lot of fun. I love doing this kind of stuff. I still have a bunch of your ammo, 8mm Mauser, man. If there's anything else that you want to see me do with it, by all means, let me know, and I'll go ahead and put some more of your lead into my car. If you guys enjoy watching this, subscribe to the channel, because I do this kind of stuff all the time. If you like the video, do me a favor and actually like the video. That helps out with the algorithm. Down in the Discord, down in the description, you're gonna find links to all sorts of stuff like Discord, Patreon, gaming channel, things like that. And without anything else to say, I'm just gonna say thanks for watching. Have yourself a fantastic day. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.